差点第135名战士没生，第221名战士死于从容。第280名平衡。7名战士累死于伤。参营长谭志伟，抓住他！162，千里。
The North Korean army blasted through the 38th parallel that day, scattering South Korean defenses. They captured Seoul, the capital of the South, in less than 72 hours and kept going, making plain its goal to take the entire peninsula. The leader of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong, had won a long and deadly civil war a year earlier and united the country under his communist flag. But he was a man made wary by a lifetime of fighting. Chairman Mao was wary of his foes inside China. He was wary of the growing Soviet empire on his northern border. And he was especially wary of Americans who had backed his enemy in the Civil War and whose army was threatening his border in the fall of 1950.
What Mao had on his hands, and this is the reverse of what people thought in the US, people thought Mao was an evil, crazy communist dictator, and MacArthur was a great hero. But from Mao's standpoint, MacArthur was the irrational one. He just wanted to plunge ahead. What would the US do if the Chinese Communist Army were marching up Mexico, talking about rolling back American capitalism in the Southwest?
Mao had begun preparations to enter the war in North Korea back in October, around the time MacArthur's troops first crossed the 38th parallel. When MacArthur's army kept pushing north, nearing the Chinese border, Mao...
1951年2月1号，联合国大会通过498号决议，谴责中国人民志愿军介入朝鲜战争，认定中华人民共和国介入朝鲜是侵略行为。这是联合国大会第一次判定一个国家为武装侵略者。
And they wanted help. They were starving.
The Chinese were sent into battle without proper clothing, without enough ammunition, without enough food, many of them. A lot of them had to just sort of fend for themselves, and many of them perished during the winter.
Marines is shot, and in his last dying breath, he's calling for his mother. And nothing is sadder or more heart-wrenching than hearing that. One of the myths is that men don't cry, and that is bullshit. I saw people cry, especially when their friends got hit. When you're in pain, you cry.
On the morning of December 7th, as the rear guard dismantled the camp at Hagaru, destroying supplies and equipment that would not fit on the trucks, the lead Marine units were already running the next gauntlet.
When we left Hagaru and we're moving on toward Kotori, there were Chinese all over.
The temperatures were plunging at night to as much as 25 below zero. And the northwest wind was blowing 15, 20 miles an hour out of Manchuria. But still, we were cheered up, thinking with optimism, well, we won't have to endure this for long. Maybe they're right. Maybe the war will be over.
They were surrounded, outnumbered, and at risk of annihilation. battle that followed is among the most momentous in U.S. history. It helped set the course of American foreign policy in the Cold War and beyond, and it remains one of the most renowned in Marine Corps annals.
I think all battles are terrible, but this one might well have been the very worst in American history. These were some of the harshest winter conditions that American forces have ever fought in.
You were not only physically frozen, you were emotionally frozen. Not knowing how much more you could give, and yet wanting to survive.
They made a monumental effort to put that kind of meal out under those conditions, and it was wonderful.
The war would be over, and maybe that's thanks in itself.
The commander of the UN forces, General Douglas MacArthur, flew into Korea the next day to launch the final offensive of what was shaping up to be a short and successful war.
MacArthur tells the troops and his commanders that the fundamental goal of the Korean War, to unify the peninsula under the control of the South Korean government, will soon be accomplished. And he says to the soldiers, I hope you boys will be home by Christmas.